Because your God would not feed the people, I came and I am feeding them. Because your God kept such as you segregated and discriminated, I came and I am unifying all nations together. This is why I came, because I did not believe in your God. Father Divine was born as George Baker in Georgia in the year 1880. Not much is known of his life because Divine believed the details of his life worldly existence were irrelevant. He worked as a traveling preacher and told sermons all through the North and South. He preached of equality and hope of the heaven on earth, celibacy, hard work, and ban on alcohol and tobacco. After some time, Divine ordained himself as God and referred to his followers as angels. They were to adhere strict discipline. He promised his followers eternal life and administrated food, shelter, jobs, and prayers. Pastors in the area didn't like his claim one bit. In 1914, Father Divine was arrested for being a public nuisance. After release, he was told to leave the state, but instead continued and was released and sent into the state insane asylum. When released in 1915, Divine moved up north and gathered disciples. By 1919, he married one of his disciples named Peninnah, who died in 1943. Over 15 years later, he started the Peace Mission Movement, which over the years made more than $15 million in savings. In 1931, Divine and his disciples were arrested in Sayville, Long Island, for invading the country with his religious practices. When included black and white women living in the same house together, Divine was sentenced to a year in jail and a $500 fine. 3 days before imposed sentencing, Judge Smith died of a heart attack. When reporters asked Divine for a comment, was, "I hated to do it." In 1946, he married his second wife, a white disciple, Edna Rose Richings, also known as Mother Divine. Father Divine died in 1965 of natural causes in his 32-room mansion on 72-acre estates, which he called the Heaven, in Gladwin, Pennsylvania.
Bishop Charles M. Sweet Daddy Grace, known as both a revered prophet and as a religious cult leader from 1940 to 1960, founded the United House of Prayer for All People in 1919 to 1921. Daddy Grace was born Marcelino Manoel de Graça on January 25, 1881, on the island of Brava in Portuguese-controlled Cape Vernon Island near West Africa. His mother was named Delumba and his father Emmanuel de Graça. In 1903, the family migrated to New Bedford, Massachusetts. Marcelino Manoel de Graça then became Charles Manoel Grace. As a young man, Grace worked in a grocery store and as a cook on the Southern Railway. Though he converted from Catholicism to Methodism, by 1921, he eventually gravitated towards the Holiness Pentecostal Church. Grace joined the Nazarene Church in Wareham, Massachusetts, until the congregation divided. Feeling called to preach, he led a faction of the church into the first United House of Prayer for All People on Kempton Street in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Dates on the founding of the church varied between 1919 and 1921. The church adopted a mission of dutiful community service and was housed in a building painted red, white, and blue, the same colors of Grace's automobile. As led by Grace, the United House of Prayer became known as a charismatic form of worship called shouting. This early church and the entire chain of House of Prayer churches that followed were based upon Pentecostal, Catholic, Baptist, and African traditions and rituals. Between 1921 and 1926, houses of prayers were established in a dozen eastern cities.
A member of the predominantly black congregants was taught to believe the following: I am God's child and God is colorless. They followed the teachings of the Bible and were baptized not in a river but under a water hose. Bishop Daddy Grace charged $1 for each baptism, watering thousands of converts at one time until he had a following of more than 3 million people at the church's highest point in the 1930s and 1940s. The congregants opened each service with the internationally known hymn, Amazing Grace, and worship according to Psalms 150 from the Old Testament, loudly and physically, accompanied by a brass band that played blues and jazz. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, Bishop Grace fed congregants and allowed the homeless to stay in his mansion. He built schools and provided employment for many. Bishop Grace established Grace Magazine in 1945 to advocate material success among his followers. In 1949, the Harlem-based United House of Prayer for All People established a community cafeteria. This 2,000-seat church on the corner of 8th Avenue and 125th Street is known as the Mother House in Harlem, or Sweet Honey Heaven, Harlem. Grace's ministry challenged the organization of another alternative religious leader, Father Divine, because Grace built his empire upon religious and spiritual beliefs that challenged the status quo of Christianity and black ministers throughout Harlem and the United States. There are contradicting perceptions of him. The question at the time, and one pondering in the modern era, is whether or not Daddy Grace was genuinely helpful and sincere in his ministry. Daddy Grace died on January 12, 1960 in Los Angeles, California. He is buried in Pine Grove Cemetery in New Bedford. 2 nickels are glued to the steps of his tomb, possibly in homage to his penniless state in 1922 and to the materialistic foundation of the church he established. At the time of his death, his personal worth was approximately $6 million. The original House of Prayer church burned down in 1972 and was rebuilt in 1975. There are currently about 110 House of Prayers in the United States, with more in Egypt, England, Cape Verde, and Portugal.
Fun fact of Sweet Daddy Grace: he believed he had the power to wash sins away and claim of great powers, and developed a line of products: soaps, hand cream, coffee, and tea. Daddy Grace claimed all these products had healing properties. Daddy Grace proclaimed himself healer of the mind and body.